GOP. And increasingly what we're seeing is the Republican Party ceasing to be a functioning national party and increasingly becoming a regional party. By the way, it looks like there might be 15 or 20 pro-Trump protesters at the Miami courthouse. This is just from the shots that I've seen. Maybe 30. I don't know. What was there, 200 in New York? Like I said, this is not a big deal. Anyhow, the Republican Party, it is increasingly becoming a regional party. And the Democratic Party is increasingly becoming a national party. Now, why would that be? Well, first of all, the Republican Party has, I mean, obviously there are some factors like rural, urban, that, you know, states that are very, very rural tend to be more Republican. States that are very urban tend to be more Democratic. You know, Oklahoma versus, or Wyoming versus New Jersey or New York, although New York has a lot of rural areas. But I think there's more to it than this. I think that the reason why the Republican Party has been shrinking, and it has been shrinking, is because they are basically offering the American public nothing other than hate, resentment, fear, grudge, grievance, victimhood. I mean, you watch Fox News, and it's just like nonstop. Oh, we're the victims of this. No, we're the victims of that. No, it's kind of pathetic. But there's a real problem associated with this. There's a much larger issue here. And that is that without two healthy political parties, and I would actually say without multiple healthy political parties, but the problem is here in the United States, we have a two-party system because we're one of only 7 democracies in the world that has first-past-the-post, winner-take-all elections. Pretty much everybody else uses a parliamentary system. In a parliamentary system, if a party gets 22% of the vote, they get 22% of the seats in parliament. So you have, you know, multiple robust political parties. But in a first-past-the-post, winner-take-all, in other words, it's all or nothing, 51% determines everything. You always end up with a two-party system, and that's what we have in the United States. And of course, the Republican Party has sought to exploit this for years and years and years, promoting, for example, the Green Party, you know, Jill Stein in the 2016 election, for example. The Republicans helping fund that, not to mention the Russians. But the bottom line is we've got this two-party system. And here's where the problem comes as the Republican Party gets smaller and becomes more regional. Without having two competitive parties, there is nothing to restrain political corruption, essentially. It is the competition between two parties that purges both parties of political corruption. When you have one party that just basically rules with an iron fist and has for a long, long time and is never, almost never anyway, successfully challenged by the other party, that party, that ruling party tends to become sclerotic. It tends to become corrupt. I mean, we see this frankly, we see this in both parties. You see this in the corruption in the Democratic Party in New York State, which is legendary. And, you know, because they haven't had a serious challenge from Republicans, New York State has not been out of the control of Democrats in forever. And you see this in Republican-controlled states like, you know, Mississippi and Florida and Texas and Alabama. And, I mean, we could go on. Tennessee, where recently, you know, they expelled 3 members, for example, 4 members. So, no, 3 members. So it's not a good thing for the country. But it's not my job to fix the Republican Party. Apparently, though, you know, the Koch network, Americans for Prosperity, the group funded heavily by the right wing billionaires, thinks it is theirs. They just dropped an ad this morning basically trashing Donald Trump. and saying that, you know, Donald Trump is a loser and you know, we need to move on. In fact, they literally use that phrase. You'll recall MoveOn.org dates its genesis back to, I believe it was 1997, when Bill Clinton was being prosecuted or persecuted, your choice, for Monica Lewinsky. And they came out and said, you know, it's time to move on from this. Let's get back to governing the country. Well, this is what the Koch network is now saying, is time to move on. I mean, literally, that's what it says in their new ad. So a couple of questions here, and I'll put them on the table and we can talk about it if you'd like. What will the consequences be for the Republican Party itself and for the Democratic Party if the Republican Party continues down this road of being a smaller and smaller and more regional political party and more corrupt? I mean, in particular, you see this right now, for example, in Ohio, where the Republican Party is just insane, so insanely corrupt that the Republican Speaker of the House in Ohio, I believe, might be the Senate leader. It's one or the other. I mean, it's just up to his eyeballs in corruption scandals. Mike DeWine gets away with an awful lot because he just seems like a nice guy, but some really awful policies. And the corruption is terrible. So, number one, what does this mean for the future of the Republican Party? How does the Democratic Party, lacking a party that has, you know, that actually can hold them to account? I mean, we saw this, a little tiny bit of this here in Oregon, where, you know, we had an elected official, or a Democratic elected official, who is now under federal investigation for corruption. Because the Republican Party in Oregon has just become nothing but an obstruction party. All they're doing, they're refusing to show up for the legislative session. Hundreds of pieces of legislation now are in limbo. Lots of important stuff is not getting done. So where does this go? How does this work out? I mean, we're seeing these differences, you know, startlingly. In Mississippi, a child in Mississippi is fully 10 times more likely to be killed with a gun than a child living in Massachusetts. Red states are embracing guns, book bans, abortion bans, pollution, more pollution. Blue states are leading the way into plural. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last 2 chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers: Carlos Marcello, New Orleans; Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida; and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd. JFK called off his motorcade. And then in Tampa on November 18th, he survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the Godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, Donald Trump is flailing about. He's totally freaked out because he apparently on Sunday, day before yesterday, he got a letter from the Department of Justice from Jack Smith's office saying, you are the target of a potential indictment of this grand jury. And he's freaking out. We'll get into that later on in the program in some detail. Also, how Trump and right-wing billionaires are proposing to create an authoritarian America. This story exposed by the New York Times. I'll share some thoughts on that with you. Also, my new book drops this week. It's called. It's available in bookstores now, or will be in the day or so. It's titled "The Hidden History of American Democracy," and I'll be telling you about that in a little bit. In the second hour of our program today, the Republican Attorney Generals, 19 of them, are planning for a Fugitive Slave Act. They want a federal version of this to track abortion and trans felons. They're claiming these people are felons. Also, anyone can be murdered because of transphobia. 2 cisgendered people were murdered because they were believed to be trans. I mean, this is or defending trans people. This is how bad it gets. We'll get into that in the second hour of the program. And, as I mentioned, Trump reveals that he's a target of January 6th, Jack Smith's January 6th probe. And he's just melting down on Truth Social right now. In the third hour of our program, Mary Grant will be with us about far-right radicalism. The Republican Party wants to cut funding for clean water programs by 64%. Also, the White House is thanking Marjorie Taylor Greene for the advertisement. Greg Abbott, the dumbest politician in America, or just the most hateful. And famine is coming to Africa. So we've got a lot to talk about today, an awful lot to talk about today. I want to start out with Donald Trump and the right-wing billionaires. I realize everybody's, kind of foaming at the mouth right now, on the media anyway, about the fact that Donald Trump just announced that he's the target of this, of Jack Smith's grand jury. Okay, we got that. But there actually, I think, is a bigger issue here, which is that the Heritage Foundation and a group of other right-wing think tanks, all by and large, most of them funded by right-wing networks that are paid for in large part by right-wing billionaires, many of them fossil fuel billionaires, that they've put together a plan for either Donald Trump or any MAGA Republican, or frankly any Republican in their mind, to take over our government, to replace small d democracy in the United States with a strongman authoritarian style government, to consolidate all the power, basically that it can be possibly consolidated within the office of the president. They want to turn America into Russia. They want to turn the president into Putin. And they're not shy about this. They're quite proud about it. They're claiming, well, the Constitution doesn't say that the president doesn't have all this power. I mean, we can do this. This is, this was written by Jonathan Swan, Charlie Savage, and Maggie Haberman over at the New York Times. Donald J. Trump and his allies are planning a sweeping expansion of presidential power. He wants to put the Justice Department back under the direct command of the president so he can use the Justice Department and the FBI to punish his political enemies. This is something that you see in third world countries and dictatorships. It's not something that you want to see here in the United States, but this is what the Republicans are saying. This is what they're going to do. They're just, like I said, they're just coming right out and saying it. The FCC, he says he wants to put the FCC under his own control. So if somebody on television says something he doesn't like, the FCC can fine them or even put them out of business. He wants to put the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces antitrust and consumer protection laws, under his control. So, hey, if a corporation gives him a big enough contribution, he can get their consumer protection laws changed so that they can, sell crappy, dangerous products if they want. I mean, the bottom line here is that Trump's first 4 years, he was so clueless when he came into office, he fully did not expect to be elected president, that he was just bumbling around. And now he and the people around him know where the levers of power are and know how to seize control of this government. He wants to strip employment protections from tens of thousands of civil service workers, and then go through and find every civil servant, every federal employee who's ever given money to a Democrat and fire them. He's basically said this. John McEntee, who was his personnel chief at the end of his administration and started this systematic sweep to purge anybody who had ever supported the Democratic Party on social media or with a financial contribution out of the White House. This is the guy who says that he's going to purge everybody in the federal government. Like I said, this is what Putin did in Russia. Let's just, make no mistake about this. And McEntee is involved in this Project 2025. This is a $22 million presidential transition program that is being led by the Heritage Foundation and a bunch of other right-wing think tanks, and Stephen Miller. And, they intend to go after our government, basically. I mean, in 2019, when Trump said to a cheering crowd, quote, "I have Article 2 where I have the right to do whatever I want as president," that's the United States that these people envision. And this would be an absolute disaster for our democracy and frankly, for democracy all around the world, because democracy all around the world looks to the United States for its model. Michael Beschloss is warning that Trump says that he's basically his message that he's going to go after his enemies when he becomes president is in part designed to scare jurors, that they'll be afraid to convict him for fear that if he becomes president and pardons himself, he's going to come after them. And by the way, that makes perfect sense, because that is the kind of thing that dictators do. He also pointed out that if Americans think that fascism is inevitable and Trump is coming, that people will start to self-censor. Not surprising. There's a new book out, Blowback, by Miles Taylor, who was, part of his administration, who says that Trump actually told border officials to break the law, and when they said, well, we can't do that, that's unlawful, he said, I'll pardon you if you get arrested. And this is almost a humorous anecdote, given everything else. Israel is desperately trying to get back stuff artifacts that Trump stole from the White House. Israel had sent these ancient ceramic candles, they're part of Israel's National Treasures collection, to the White House for a Hanukkah celebration in 2020, for the last Hanukkah celebration. And Trump took them with him to Mar-a-Lago. And Israel's trying to get them back. They were supposed to just be, a one-week loan to the White House. But they're down in Mar-a-Lago right now. What else is down there? Did he take the silverware? Did he take the china? Did he take furniture? It's incredible. It's incredible. Meanwhile, my new book is out. Or will be in stores in a couple of days. You can order it right now. It'll arrive on Thursday, I believe. And it's titled "The Hidden History of American Democracy: Rediscovering Humanity's Ancient Way of Living." And writing this book was probably the most fun and interesting of all the books I've written so far in the Hidden History series. And I think you'll find it the most fascinating read, discovering what the founders thought about democracy, what their understanding of the kind of democracy they were creating was, and perhaps most important, where they got their ideas from. I have talked many times on this program over the years, and it's in the book, about how democracy is in our genes, how basically every animal on Earth, or all the social animals, 99% of all the animals on Earth, make decisions democratically. Yes, there are alpha animals, but and they have first choice of sexual partner, of mate, but that's it. Generally speaking, whether it's a ball of gnats flying in the air, or a flock of geese, or a school of fish, or a herd of wildebeest, whatever it may be, Animals make decisions by democracy, by voting. When a school of fish is swimming along, if 51% of the fish move 10 degrees to the right, the whole school moves 10 degrees to the right. It looks like a telepathic, but actually they're all voting and they're all counting votes continuously. The same thing with a flock of birds. This is why Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, referred to nature's God. John Adams went in and scratched it out and wrote the Christian God, and Jefferson went back in and scratched it out and put nature's God, and it's still there to this moment. Because they believed that nature and democracy were essentially the same thing, that democracy was one of the rules of nature. Now, they spent a lot of time citing European Enlightenment thinkers, people like Hobbes and Locke and Spinoza and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Montesquieu. But these people, it turns out, and this was one of the things that just, was an amazing revelation when I discovered it. And I didn't uniquely discover it. Other people have written about this in the past, but was that these European philosophers, these European Enlightenment thinkers, got their ideas via the French missionaries in the late 1600s and throughout the early 1700s here in the United States. Well, it was the colonies back then. From the Hurons, from the Wendat tribe, from a member of ultimately a member of the Iroquois Confederacy. And I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff. Uh-oh. Are we still on the air? Okay. This is pretty amazing stuff, democracy is just so incredibly resilient. It's so baked into us that it's part of all of us. I mean, this is important stuff as well. So be sure to check the feeds and things. Yeah, you're doing that. Thank you. So anyhow, I wrote this book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, about where this all came from. The introduction and the first chapter are available free online right now over at hartmannreport.com. It's today's daily rant or daily take. And I encourage you to check it out. I think you'll find it a fascinating book and an important story, to understand the history of American democracy. And what does this tell us about what we should be doing going forward? So stay with us. It's 18 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a second. And welcome back. Vincent in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Hey, Vincent, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Watching Representative Jayapal speak on Democracy Now! Today makes the radical in me come out. I think that people confuse the Jewish state with religion or Judaism. I was raised in New York among my best friends are Jews, but they're not Zionists, and I'm against religion. It just tells everyone, you're not smart enough to live your own life. You have to live by our rules. And if we coalesce as a nation, you got to live by our political beliefs. And Israel is definitely really giving Judaism a bad name.
I think that the apartheid policies of the Israeli government, the conservative Israeli governments over the last couple of years, really over the last few decades, have done a lot of harm to the reputation of Israel. I don't think it helps, I think it feeds anti-Semitism, let's put it that way. Israel needs to do something about this. They really need a two-state solution, I'm telling you. Vincent, thanks for the call. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, as always. Can you please explain to your listeners what's up with, according to the 14th Amendment, Trump is automatically disqualified to run for office because he participated in an insurrection. So what's
he has to
going
be
on with
convicted
that?
of that first. I would guess, okay, Alfredo, that once Jack Smith is done with Donald Trump, the problem is that may not happen until after the election. But once Jack Smith is done with Donald Trump, that Trump is going to have a hard time running for public office. I mean, this is the bet that Trump is making right now, is that he can get out ahead of this. That he can be the guy who is, who becomes America's Putin, who becomes essentially America's dictator, and can pardon anybody who might help him and can punish anybody who might hurt him.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say that Trump gets into office. If the case is already ongoing, can he pardon himself while that's happening or not?
Yeah, all he'd have to do is put in somebody like Bill Barr at the head, or worse, actually, at the head of the Justice Department as Attorney General, and that person would then just stop all the proceedings. Trump has also just said right up front, he's going to turn the Justice Department into his essentially private police force to enforce his political perspectives. He's going to do what Putin has done. And so if you think that they would continue to be allowed to prosecute him, you're wrong. I mean, it's just, it's not going to happen.
Well, they have to do something about, they have to modify these pardon powers that the president has, because it's allowing it to abuse that power. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Alfredo. Good to hear from you. Yep, absolutely. The pardon powers have been badly abused. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Are you feeling exhausted by Donald Trump? So many Americans are. And not Donald Trump, not just Donald Trump. The entire GOP. We've got this war on trans people. We've got a war on queer people. We've got a war on people of color, a war on voting. Young people concerned about climate change, and Republicans not only refusing to do anything about it, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene out there talking about how, oh, well, it's just normal variation, it's nothing to worry about. Just keep on shoveling that coal. People cutting pills in half because they can't afford their medicine. Parents who don't have enough money to properly dress their kids for school, even though they're working full-time. Seniors fearing that the Republican Party is going to finally succeed in killing off Social Security and Medicare. They're trying it again. It's this whole, yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling as part of cut Social Security. It's nuts. I got a whole op-ed about it over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour, and a lot going on today, an awful lot going on today. Let's talk about it. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind is I think Smith is getting ahead of Cannon here by zeroing in on January 6th. And I'm going to tell you something. There's three ways of taking down Trump, in my mind. So number one is that Smith indicts by the end of this week for January 6th for insurrection and an attempted coup d'etat. And if you get the right judge in D.C., and you should be able to, no Trump-appointed judge, that judge, every time Trump tries to delay that trial, just says no.
Right.
Like Nancy Reagan, just say no. Yeah. And that trial happens ASAP. Maybe by the time it's Christmas, that trial is done. Trump's found guilty. He's ineligible to run.
Yep.
So we don't have to worry about a right-wing Yeah, we don't have to worry. Well, of course, then who are the Republicans going to run, the Republicans? Is it going to be DeSantis? Is it going to be some other whack job? Leads to number two. If these trials do get delayed, the ads on TV against Trump are going to be brutal.
Yeah.
All you got to do is keep running a loop of what happened on January 6th. Have them say, go out there and fight. I mean, they're going to brutalize Trump. Yeah. And it's not just going to be Rick Wilson's, the Lincoln
Project,
the Lincoln Project. Yeah, I think finally the Democrats are going to start figuring out we got to hit below the belt, just like the Republicans do.
Yeah, in reply to some of the points you made, number one, I don't expect an indictment on Friday. I think it's going to be Monday of next week because they gave him 4 days, which takes you through Thursday. I'm guessing on Friday they'll be, tying up all the details, and Monday the indictment will drop. But I could be wrong. I mean, it could happen on Friday. And secondly, my guess of who the Republicans are going to, once Trump goes down, essentially, I think Glenn Youngkin is going to be the guy. He comes across like Mr. Rogers, but his policies are vicious. The governor of Virginia. And I
don't trust him.
Yeah, and Rupert Murdoch has come out and said that he thinks Glenn Youngkin should be the guy. And I think Youngkin is staying out of the race right now because he doesn't want Trump aiming at him. But once Trump has been neutered, I think he's going to jump in. We'll see. I mean, I could be entirely wrong, but these are my thoughts on the things that you just brought up, Dennis. Dennis, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls. What do you think about what's going on today? How do you think this is all going to play out? What are your friends and neighbors saying? How do you think this is going to impact both Republican and Democratic politics going forward? We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Don't forget, my new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, is out this week. And, order one now. Book report today, or book club today, is Cuban Women Confront the Future. It's an interview with Vilma Espin. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question: what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting,
but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espin: in Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future, by Velma Espin.
And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here, Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I'm just kind of curious. Which one do you think is going to have the energy to take the day? Is it going to be the energy behind the people that are so aggravated about the crazy abortion laws and the loose gun laws? Or is it going to be the energy behind the Republicans going totally fascist and controlling the vote and sequestering the vote and basically rigging the elections in the red states? I'm not sure which one's going to have the power to overcome the other.
Yeah, my concern, Mark, is we're talking about the White House in 2024, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my concern is that if Joe Manchin and John Huntsman roll out a presidential campaign in all 50 states, sponsored by right-wing billionaires and Republican donors under the No Labels Party banner, that I mean, you know, we saw Ralph Nader essentially hand the election in Florida to George W. Bush in 2000. He got you know, thousands, over 9,000 votes? I forget the number. He got thousands of votes anyway. And George W. Bush won by a couple hundred. And then we saw Jill Stein hand the election to Donald Trump in 2016. If she had not been on the ballot, or if the votes that had gone to her had gone to Hillary Clinton in 4 swing states, Donald Trump would not have been president. So, and those were both very marginal candidates. Joe Manchin and John Huntsman, with big money from No Labels, from these very, very large Republican donors, would not be a fringe Green Party candidate like Cornel West is going to be this time. Instead, or the Bobby Kennedy candidacy, which I don't think is going to go anywhere. But instead, it would be a very real threat, and would mostly draw away from Joe Biden. Would mostly pull independents, you know, pull away reasonable independents. And so that's my big concern. And Joe Manchin is behaving right now like he's running for president. He's starting to talk and act like a person who's planning to run for president. So I think that's probably going to be inevitable.
That's part of the reason I'm not so assured anymore that Trump won't end up back in the White House.
That's right. If No Labels and Manchin run, and it's Trump versus Biden, or frankly any Republican versus Biden, there's a very good chance the Republican will win with a plurality rather than a majority. And you know, frankly, I think that's a real threat to our republic, especially given what we just learned that, you know, the Heritage Foundation and these other right-wing think tanks are planning on doing, and essentially turning the presidency into a Putin-esque style of government. Mark, thanks for the call. Great question. Annie in Sugar Grove, North Carolina. Hey, Annie, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Well, this thing with Trump wanting to be, you know, over everything, including the civil servant workers. Yeah. I'm a retired federal worker, and there are 2 different retirement plans. There's a civil servant retirement plan, and then somewhere in Reagan, because I started in '85, it might have been a couple years before that. Then there was the federal employees retirement system. So there's 2 separate retirement systems. And there's probably more in the latter than in the former for federal employees. When I got hired in '85, I didn't have to take the civil service test because I had worked for attorneys for about a dozen years. And but I went ahead and took it a couple years later, and I passed it like with flying colors. Of course, that's not why I called. The reason I called is the federal workers that in both categories that are retired and are collecting a pension. He's so vindictive. Who's to say he wouldn't come after? Because I'm very outspoken. Who's to say he wouldn't come after people like me? Oh, sure. You know, I call Congress people and senators and leave my comments. They don't, not just my 2 senators and my representative. I've called other ones, you know, and they know who I am. Even if you have a private block on your number, there's technology that undoes that, you know. So that's, it's like, I'm just throwing it out there because I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers are also retired federal workers. And, you know, more incentive to get everybody out and vote. And the other thing, I live near a college town, and I have probably talked to thousands of young people. I'm just a few years younger than you are, and they're not having it. Yeah. An 18-year-old girl was shampooing my hair about 4 weeks ago, and we were chatting, and she's like, we're not going backwards. We're not going backwards. And I talked to young people at the grocery store. One young woman said, you remind me of my mother. And I said, well, when was your mom born? She goes, 1960. And I said, I'm a 55 baby. so when I see her in the store, she goes, I tell my mom, you know, all about what you do and how you make calls. And she said, she's just like you. And so, you know, so I think we need to keep up that kind of momentum and because they're not going to win with these young folks. These young people are not having it. Yeah, the problem is that most of them are not registered to vote, and that's and multiple red states, Texas and Florida in particular, have basically criminalized voter registration drives.
And so
right.
that's
what happened here, and I need to check on this. What happened here in North Carolina when Pat McCrory was our governor? I've lived here 15 years. I'm not from North Carolina. I'm from another state. Didn't work in the U.S. Attorney's Office in this state. It was another state. Anyway, Pat McCrory, he took away the ability of young folks if they're 17 in August, but they'll be 18 by, the second Tuesday after the first month, or the second Tuesday after the second Monday in November, to vote. He took that ability away, and I need to figure out if it was reinstated by our current governor. Now his name has slipped my mind. I've got so much in my head. Cooper, isn't that his name? Cooper from North Carolina.
Roy Cooper, is it?
Roy Cooper, yeah. So it's Roy Cooper. So I'm wondering if that was ever put back in place, because Pat McCrory, he did that in this state.
No, they don't want people to vote, and they definitely don't want young people to vote.
And what's so scary is he's a baby boomer like we are. I mean, he's like a couple years younger or older than me. And it's like, who raised these folks?
Yeah. There's a huge fascist movement in the United States, and this is a five-alarm fire. I mean, what Trump is saying he's going to do should be a 5-alarm fire for all Americans. We should all be freaked out.
That last comment was a rhetorical question.
No, I get it. Annie, thank you for the call. Your points are really well made. I appreciate it, and keep up the great activism. Thank you. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Just real quick, I have to go back in the office. And forgive the background noise. It's pouring like crazy right now.
Oh, really? Okay.
As if the skies are crying over Trump's nonsense.
Yeah.
But you hear how he's trying to beat off flattery to Judge Eileen Cannon moments before or days before.
Oh, he's done everything but say, I'll put her on the Supreme Court if I'm president again.
Yeah. I hope Jack Smith is paying attention to that, because this will give him more ammunition to file more charges against Trump for trying to tamper with the justice system, and then add to that, push for Eileen Cannon to be removed from this case, or possibly removed from the bench.
Yeah.
I mean, the Court of Appeals is keeping a watch.
I think they're going to have to wait until she does something outrageous, frankly. And maybe she won't.
It might be outrageous,
we'll
right?
see. I mean, she's got to be making the same calculation that every Republican politician in Washington, D.C. right now is making, which is, when do I come out against Trump? Or in her case, when do I rule against Trump? Do I wait for, it has to be after he's essentially fatally wounded, politically speaking. And will she rule in his favor prior to that moment? I think if she knows that these indictments are coming down in both Georgia and Washington, D.C., and she has no control over them, and she can't protect him in that context, and therefore he's going down, she's going to be far less inclined to be his toady, because she knows that there's therefore going to be very little chance that he will put her on the Supreme Court, because he's not going to be president. But, we'll see. I mean, who knows?
That's so true.
Yeah.
Ooh, I just went through the rain, too.
There you go. Michael, thank you. Thanks for the call. Mike in Clinton Township, Michigan. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
What's on my mind, Tom, is school loans. About 30 years ago, I decided to attend Michigan State University. I got a finance and marketing degree. I walked across the street from the business building and went to law school. When I graduated from law school, I had accumulated about $70,000 in school loans. I was offered a job upon graduation clerking for a judge, making about $38,000 a year.
Yikes.
After that, I became a public defender, which brings you great personal satisfaction, doesn't pay a whole hell of a lot.
Yep.
So when I contacted my loan servicer, they told me my payment was $1,600 a month. I could not make that payment. They put me on a graduated income repayment plan. And even that payment was a burden to make. The fact of the matter is, this loan, which I have been paying on it's going on 23 years now, has ballooned to about $138,000 because when you're on the graduated income repayment plan, you're only paying down the principal. The interest keeps on accruing, which is the insidious portion of the income repayment plan. And so
this is why we used to have usury laws.
Yeah. It used to be 11% here in Michigan when I went to law school, but I don't even think there is a usury.
No, it was 10% federally until 72, I think it was, when Nixon lifted that.
Yep. So the point is, I have been unable to buy a new car because of this unsecured debt. I had been unable to buy a home because of the unsecured debt, and on and on.
Yeah.
Today or yesterday, I received an email from the Department of Education, and because I had been paying on this loan for over going on 25 years, they have forgiven it.
Wow. See, they just, Joe Biden just rebooted your life.
I just got notified yesterday.
Wow.
And I can't tell you how relieved I am. I'm sorry. It's just been such a burden. And anybody that doesn't think that electing Democrats makes a difference, they're sorely mistaken.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Mike. That is one hell of a story, and an important one. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and good luck on the rest of your life, Mike. You've got a whole new lease on life. That's wonderful. We'll be right back. It's 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program, the place where despair is not an option. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. And welcome back. Michael in Chehalis, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Hey, good morning, Tom. And it's crazy. This is the third mic in a row.
Yeah, it is. You are, indeed.
And the second mic there, God, my heart goes out to that guy. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I didn't know where he was going with that whole story.
I'm crazy.
What a great
ending. I just can't figure out why mainstream media, or even on FS-TV, unless I missed it, nobody is discussing the fact that Netanyahu is trying to destroy the democracy in Israel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Democracy Now! Has done a good job of covering that. And I've mentioned it a few times here, but, yes.
I probably haven't.
His plan with the judiciary is basically, it's a variation on what Trump is talking about.
Exactly. There's hundreds of thousands of people in the street.
Yeah.
And it's nothing on TV. Nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, well, go ahead. This is what happens when right-wingers with fascist tendencies become the power brokers in their countries, become the head of their countries.
Well, they become that way here with our media so bad that it's crazy. I cannot believe there isn't something on TV over these mass protests. I mean, they are seriously... Netanyahu is doing exactly what Trump wants to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
isn't he under indictment?
He is. Yeah, he has been under indictment for some time. That's why he wants to reorganize the judiciary so that he can force them to drop the charges against him, basically.
Exactly. So. Well, Tom, you have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Good to hear from you. MG in Ada, Oklahoma. Hey, MG. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom, for letting me talk to you. I was just curious, besides sending Donnie to prison, who could we make him and all of his cronies pay for the damages done to the Capitol? that they did on January the 6th. I mean, there was a lot of damage done, and taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that.
Yeah, paintings were defaced. There was poop on the walls. I mean, it was pretty awful stuff that they did. People urinating in the hallways.
Right.
I don't know what the total sum, what the total cost was. I guarantee you, if the tables were turned, if a Democrat had called a mob to the Capitol, Republicans would know the exact amount to the last penny and would be screaming about it every single day.
You bet they would. You bet they would. Another thing I was wanting to tell you about, here in Oklahoma, there's like 35, 36 tribal nations, and all native nations, which I'm native to, are democratic social nations in a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And
they run as social
democracies. What I don't understand is I see all these tribal nations, they all have their own, tags on their vehicles and stuff. And a lot of them have Trump stickers and stuff on it. And really? I don't get that, because, socialism is a dirty word. And we have two representatives, Tom Cole and Mark Wayne Mullins, that are both Republicans, and their families are, can go on and on with all kinds of social programs, but they're totally against it for anybody else.
Right. Well, that's the weird conundrum of the GOP is they want everything for themselves and nothing for the people that they don't think are part of their community or their tribe. I get it. MG, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good, positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. Well, welcome back. Russell in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. At the beginning of the show, you were talking about how democracy and nature are sort of intertwined, and I think that's really a large concept. Our Earth is just a series of ecosystems that are all independent or interdependent, and bugs, bacteria, birds, everything, they have to work together and they all have to be represented. And
that's right.
I feel that our society and the body politic are essentially an ecosystem. And if we can't represent, if everybody in that society can't be represented, from the rich to the poor to the LGBTQ, whoever, then our society is going, it can't function, completely. It can't be a successful ecosystem. And the Republicans are trying to, stop people from voting. And so our system will never be really representative of what's actually going on. And so it can't be successful. It's just has to be that way. And,
and your red states have your lowest levels of voter participation in the country, by the way.
What's that?
The red states have some of the lowest levels of voter participation in the country. And the states that have, with the exception of Utah, which has all mail-in voting, the states that have all mail-in voting, very, very high levels of voter participation, because Democrats want people to participate, Republicans don't. It's that simple. Russell, thanks for the call. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, you know, I think Donald Trump figures that he has a better chance of being installed as president than being acquitted of any of these, or all or any of these charges that are coming towards him.
Oh, yeah, that's clearly his strategy.
Yeah, and
Pardon himself.
Yeah, well, I say installed, and the reason he thinks that is because he knows what he did wrong last time. And I'll frame that up in terms of what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. It wasn't us, because if it would have been us, we would have brought guns. Well, we know they brought guns. I think what she meant is we would have opened fire.
Right.
That's
we would have
what
used
they
the guns.
didn't do.
Yeah.
That's what they did wrong. They didn't overrun the place with gunfire. And I'm telling you, I mean, this Project 25 and the other thing that's come, you know, the 19 red states, governors and attorneys general are pursuing abortion. You know, if you go to another state for abortion, they're trying to criminalize that. Yep. Jay Inslee wrote a letter to the governor of Idaho when they said, if you go to Washington, and Jay Inslee said, don't do it, bud, don't do it. And this will radically balkanize America, because look at this. Yeah. Don't just think about abortion. If gambling isn't legal in your state and you take a trip to Las Vegas, are they going to prosecute you? Or how about this one? I got a better one. What if somebody from another state comes to your state like Washington and you say, oh, Tennessee license plate, let's pull them over and charge him for something that's legal in Tennessee but not legal here? A good one would be, do you have a concealed carry permit? Oh, yeah, I have one for Tennessee. They don't actually have one in Tennessee anymore. No, but you don't have a Washington concealed carry permit, and you have a firearm in your car. Take the gun, impound the car, throw them in jail. You see, this would just lead to a complete breakdown of the society. If they would start, and frankly, I'm not sure the Supreme Court wouldn't uphold these.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a complete breakdown of society is exactly what the Republicans want, because they think out of that they can create their new little fascist strongman empire. Paul, thank you. All your points are well taken. It's as always. We'll continue. As Paul just mentioned, we've got 19 attorneys general, Republican attorneys general, who are asking for a Fugitive Slave Act for women.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions, and new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism, as a neo-colonial system, races not to disarm, which is hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, the .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 15 million and climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a deuce-deuce, or maybe even a TAC-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well-honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. The book is Night Vision, Illuminating War and Class of the Neocolonial Terrain by Butch Lee and Red Rover, first published in 1993.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome to the second hour of our program. The Republican attorneys general are basically asking for a fugitive slave act. I mean, this is just incredible. The Biden administration has proposed a rule that would say that if, say, Idaho, for example, not only outlawed abortion, but said that if you take a person across state lines, it would have to be a person under 18, but if you take a person across state lines for the purposes of getting an abortion, you commit a crime, and presumably so does that person. And well, I don't know if the person getting the abortion would be charged. Probably not, actually, because they would be a minor. But in any case, you commit a crime. So Idaho then, butts up against Washington State and Oregon, and so Idaho might reach out to Washington or Oregon and say, we'd like records of your abortion clinics. We want to know, what women showed up for abortions and that sort of thing. Now, this is also gender-affirming care for trans people. And now we discover that 19 Republican attorneys general are fighting explicitly this Biden proposal to say that blue states don't have to rat out people fleeing red states to get abortions or trans care or gender-affirming care. And in fact, they want to be able to pursue women in their states who have moved to other states. So what do you do? I mean, if let's say that you're a family living in Idaho or Mississippi or Ohio or Indiana or whatever, one of these red states that have outlawed abortion, and you've got a 15-year-old daughter, and you're worried that what happens if she gets raped and impregnated? And if you take her to another state to get an abortion where it's legal, you go to prison. Are we going to start seeing mass exodus of families, of women of childbearing age and girls leaving red states and moving to blue states? Is this what these guys are trying to do? Is this what they're trying to bring about? I mean, in Louisiana, the Attorney General Jeff Landry, he wants info on out-of-state abortions and gender-affirming care. He says it's needed, his spokesman said yesterday, it's needed to investigate the sexual abuse of children. Right, so you need to find out who got an abortion out of state. I get it. Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin. If you had an abortion or gender-affirming care outside the state of Arkansas and you are a legal resident of Arkansas, Tim Griffin, Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin, wants to know about it. In Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti has joined 18 Republican governors in demanding that the federal government not block him, not prevent him from getting medical records. Basically, what the Biden administration is doing is proposing a change to what's called the HIPAA law, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This is administered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and they have the power to tweak the rules of HIPAA. And one of the rules that they're trying to strengthen, essentially, is that if you're a woman or if you're a trans person and you go anywhere in the United States for the purposes of getting care, whether it's abortion care or gender-affirming care, medical care, that your medical records, the federal government is trying to say, under the HIPAA laws, your medical records are still yours. They are still private. And your doctor cannot be forced, or your hospital cannot be, for clinic or whatever it may be, all of the above, cannot be forced to reveal that information to the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, some red state that you may have come from. And now we've got 19 Republicans on record saying, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want the federal government to protect the medical records of women and trans people. We want to be able to go after them. This includes the Attorney General of Arkansas, the Attorney General of Alabama, the Attorney General of Alaska. These are the states where the Attorneys General are actively trying to prevent the federal government from preventing them from going into blue states and demanding women's and trans people's medical records. And by the way, I guarantee you, it's not going to stop there. This is the low-hanging fruit. But, what happens when they start, now the war on the LGBTQ community expands to gay men. And so they start demanding records on HIV. Or, I don't know if there's any medical condition unique to lesbians. I don't think that there is. But, they'll figure out a way. They've got their persecuted minorities that they want to go after, and they're going to figure out. So anyhow, the Attorneys General of Arkansas, the Attorney General of Alabama, the Attorney General of Alaska, the AGs of Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. If you live in one of those states and there is a woman of childbearing age or a girl of childbearing age in your family, you are now at risk of imprisonment. Or if there's a trans person in your family, you are at risk of, and so is that trans person, of imprisonment in these states. It is absolutely nothing less than that. And this war on women and on trans people, well, on the entire queer community, really, this war that these states are waging is having, social consequences beyond just those individuals. For example, this was in Richmond, Indiana, last month. Michelle Dion Peacock she is a 59-year-old straight black woman. She is not a lesbian. She is a cis woman, 59 years old. And she was confronted by 67-year-old Tommy Wayne Earl in Richmond, Indiana in June because he believed that she was a trans woman, that she was actually a man or had been born, not actually, I'm sorry, that's terrible language, that she had been born a man or whatever, assigned male, and had become a woman. In fact, she was born a woman. And Tommy Wayne Earl slit her throat with a straight razor because he thought she was trans. She wasn't. This is the fear that every trans person in America lives with every day, and trans people are regularly being beaten, being harassed, and being murdered. And anybody who might look like they're slightly, possibly, that woman looks a little too masculine for me, or that man looks a little too feminine for me, out come the razor blades. When Earl was arrested, the guy who murdered her, he said she was a male acting like a woman. That's a verbatim quote. And he said, and I'd do it again. In another incident, 32-year-old Colin Smith was stabbed to death here in Portland, Oregon. Another straight person. a cis person, a cis man, but he was out with some coworkers at the High Dive Bar here in Portland when 24-year-old Ronique Jackson started harassing one of his coworkers who was trans. Smith tried to intervene, and Jackson stabbed him. I mean, transphobia is deadly. And now we have these states that are saying, oh, we're just trying to protect the children. Which is, I mean, that was Adolf Hitler's excuse, for God's sake. Arkansas, Alabama, Alaska, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah. These states are on record now as essentially wanting a fugitive slave act that they can use to, saying that they can assert this to pursue trans people and women who are seeking abortion care anywhere in the country. What is this going to do to our country? What is this going to do to our society? Are we going to start seeing an exodus of families from these red states into blue states just for their own friggin' safety? This is insane.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Actually, it's not insane. This is fascism. Let's call this exactly what it is. This is how fascists behave. And welcome back. Sandra in Boston, Massachusetts. Hey, Sandra, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I have a couple of issues. One, you talk a lot about these third-party candidates being the demise of maybe the Democratic candidate, and I think that's not always accurate. I think that in the case of like AOC and Barack Obama and Stacey Abrams, they were able to expand the electorate. These aren't like takeaway.
Well, then why isn't Stacey Abrams governor right now? Brian Kemp purged 100,000 people off the voting rolls just a year before he won by 50,000 votes.
Exactly. And she expands the electorate by, I think, 1.9 million, and he gets rid of 900,000.
Yeah.
So, and the bigger issue I have with Biden, and, I hear you talk often about, people complain that, especially in the black community, that, the Democrats aren't very much different than the Republicans. And I think there's a good argument to be made there to some degree, because Joe Biden isn't too far, in my opinion, from a Joe Manchin.
Then you're very, very wrong, Sandra. Joe Manchin is a Republican in drag. He's pretending to be a Democrat.
Hear me out.
All right, go for it.
Hear me out, please. Please hear me out. One reason we have Clarence Thomas is Joe Biden. Joe Biden has gotten the...
That was 30 years ago, Sandra. Is that the thin thread that you're going to use to try to beat up Joe Biden? Honest to God?
No,
that's all you got?
No. What I have right now is, listen, Tom, under Joe Biden's watch, and I'm not a Republican. I'm not a fan. I'm just concerned about the future, because you'll say, hey, fascism will happen, and for a lot of people, their lives don't change. But my life has changed significantly as a woman of color. But under Joe Biden, so far, and I'm not saying this is 100% at his feet, we've lost Roe, we've lost voting rights. He couldn't get the George Floyd.
And that had nothing to do with Joe Biden. All of those things had to do with Republicans, and the reason you couldn't get voting rights through was because of Joe Manchin, who you just said was no different than Joe Biden, which is just wrong, Sandra. You are either drinking the Kool-Aid or you are a Republican shill on this program.
No.
So which is it?
No, Tom, hear me out. Tom, I'm trying.
I have heard you out, and what you're trying to feed me is frankly pathetic, Sandra. I mean, these are not even weak arguments.
No,
if you think that there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans, you are lost. I am sorry, you are lost. Judy in Sun Lakes, Arizona, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi there, Tom. I just wanted to let you know, I'm a PBS NewsHour watcher because pretty much it's the only news I can stand watching.
I get it.
Anyway, yesterday they had on Dick Gephardt.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he and some former some reasonable Republicans like Chuck Hagel and some others, that they've started an organization called Citizens to Save Our Republic. And basically they're going after no labels to get them to not run anybody in 2024.
Yeah, it's not going to work. No labels. They're going to do it. I mean, you know, they've got big money from major Republican billionaire donors.
Well, Move On is behind this. I mean, there are a bunch of organizations of them that are after them. So, I mean, hopefully it'll make a difference.
It's all going to be defensive, and that's the tragedy, because defensive stuff like that, I mean, it's just not even going to rise into the radar screen of independent, low information voters, and that's who No Labels is going after. Judy, thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, you know, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. You know, Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. You know, Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and you know, as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, you know, ask them, you know, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "22 minutes past the hour. Fox News. I mean, this is just to add to my rant about, you know, how the Republicans are coming after trans people. Excuse me. Fox News. It turns out, this is from MediaMatters.org. They apparently, once they got called out on this, changed some of the articles, but more than 18 articles over on the Fox News website from the Associated Press and Reuters have been altered by Fox News to eliminate language like gender-affirming care or medical care and replace it with language like sex change operations, to change medical abortion, to change medical abortion to chemical abortion. I mean, they're literally changing the meaning of our words to make news stories into political op-eds, basically. This is, and turning these articles into something that's just not even true anymore. I mean, it's like the heartbeat stuff. You know, oh yeah, we're going to outlaw abortion once you can hear a heartbeat. Well, there's no heart beating at 6 weeks. There's literally no heart. It's a mass of cells that is about the size of a grain of rice that looks like a blob. There are some cells in there that will one day become a heart, and they've started kind of twitching, but there's no heart. But you know, this is, reality doesn't matter to these people. It's all about controlling women. It's all about, you know, being the guys in charge of everything. Also, in this hour, Donald Trump has revealed that he is now the target of the federal grand jury that's meeting in Washington, D.C., being run by Jack Smith. And, you know, over on Truth Social, he is just melting down. Horrifying news, deranged Jack Smith. Yeah. And he says, I was given a very short 4 days to report to the grand jury. Now, if that was on Sunday, 4 days presumably is up on Thursday. Does that mean that Friday the indictment comes down, or will it be next Monday? Does that mean that Friday is the day that they put a bow on the package, you know, at the prosecutor's office. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if it'll be Monday, but I think it's safe to say it's going to be this week or next. I mean, you don't wave those red capes in front of that bull unless you know that you're ready, right? And what will the charges be? Is he going to be charged with obstructing an official proceeding? We know that, you know, that's what they went after the 3%ers and the Proud Boys for. Seditious conspiracy, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, inciting an insurrection, the fake electors scheme. This would be defrauding the government of the United States of America. Obstruction of justice, his efforts to block investigations, his efforts to bribe potential witnesses against him, jury tampering, judge threatening the families of prosecutors coming after him. I mean, these are all things that, frankly, I think he could be charged with. And I suspect Jack Smith, you know, the guy who took down Slobodan Milosevic, the guy who prosecutes presidents of other countries as war criminals, I don't think Jack Smith is gonna go easy on this guy. I don't think that he's cutting him any slack at all just because he's a big shot, he's a Republican, he's a billionaire, and he's a former president. Jack Smith doesn't care. He's saying equal justice under the law. And, you know, frankly, I wish the Justice Department had been saying this for the whole last 2.5 years. I realize there were some, you know, weak investigations going on, and, you know, before Jack Smith was appointed, but this guy is ripping up the pavement. He is on track, and Donald Trump has got to be terrified. He is looking at the possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. Not to mention, you know, that he's being prosecuted with criminal charges against him in New York State and now coming up in Georgia, almost certainly. Bonnie Willis, you know, she's probably going to indict him like the day after Jack Smith does. Or maybe she'll wait a couple of days for the news cycle to settle down or something. I don't know. I don't know how political she's viewing this. My sense of it is that she's not viewing it through any political lens, that she's just being a good district attorney. And frankly, the Georgia AG should be doing this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
Georgia AG is a Republican, and the Republican Party has just gone all in on criminality in America. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm.
His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war, how to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred, how to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Linda in Chicago. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom, a longtime listener. And thank you for standing up for us with the earlier caller saying there's no difference between Biden and Manchin.
Right.
We know if you're educated about it, you know that there is. But we know how important it is to reelect President Biden because he's protecting our democracy. And we talk about all types of discrimination against gay people, against black people, et cetera, all the time. So I want to know, why aren't we talking more about age discrimination when it comes to President Biden? Trump is close to the same age as Biden, but they never talk about not supporting him because of his age. Biden has proven he is healthy mentally and physically. Yeah. What makes me so mad is that I believe that when Democrats say Biden is too old to be president, we are falling once again into the hands of the Republicans, repeating their negative talking points about Biden and saying he can't be president because of his age, when he is the most prepared, most experienced, most knowledgeable, most resilient person that may have ever run for president. So
he's doing damn good.
70.
He is doing damn good.
And doing damn good.
I think we do have to acknowledge that his age and frankly Trump's age, although Trump behaves more like somebody in his 70s, and Biden, at least the very careful way he walks, kind of suggests that he's in his 80s. I'm not sure it's ageism or age discrimination, Linda, to point that out. It's just a reality that we have to live with. The piece of it that concerns me, and I talked about this last week, is that the Republicans are going to run on this, whether we like it or not. And frankly, I'm not hearing from Democrats that Biden's too old. I'm hearing that from Republicans. And they're going to run on it. And the way they're going to run on it is they're going to say a vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris. And because Kamala Harris is largely unknown to most Americans, they're going to characterize her however they choose to. When I talked about it last week, I said this was how they got John Kerry with the Swift boat stuff. Was he didn't define himself early on enough, and therefore they defined him for him, and convinced enough Americans that he was some kind of a preening elitist who faked injuries in Vietnam, that he lost the election. And I'm very concerned that Democrats are not doing a good job right now. The Democratic Party is not doing a good job right now, and this administration is not doing a good job right now of putting Kamala Harris out in a very positive, front-facing way, so that when the Republicans come along and say, a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris for president sometime in the next 4 years, which Nikki Haley literally said on the campaign trail just 2 days ago, that when they come out and say that, people will go, yeah, cool, we like Kamala. What do you think?
Well, they want to vote for Tim Scott. They're using race as a reason.
Yeah, well, I get that. I don't think Tim Scott has any chance. I just can't imagine the
I know,
the
but
GOP.
they understand how important, trying to fool people using race is.
Yeah. That's for sure. Linda, thank you for the call. Your points were really well made. Thank you. Matt in East Jordan, Michigan. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. It was kind of sickening listening to Joe Scarborough this morning go on and on about no label $70 million and how, I'm really hearing a bad echo. Anyway, there's, that these people are these no labels people are adamantly against Donald Trump. Do you actually know the people that are donating? I mean, are the names out there?
Yeah, they are. And they are major Republican donors who are donating to No Labels. Not all of the names are out there because No Labels doesn't reveal, who's giving them money, but some of the right-wing foundations and some of the right-wingers who have disclosed their donations, what we're seeing is that all of the donations so far that we know of that have been publicly revealed that have gone to No Labels are from major Republican donors.
Well, this is a failure, then, of the Democratic Party again.
No, it's not. It is an attempt by right-wing billionaires to corrupt our electoral process. It's got nothing to do with the Democratic Party.
No, what I'm talking about is exposing the names, just as they're not out there,
This is not a secret, Matt. I've seen these names in a half a dozen news stories. It's not, they're often included in the news stories. If you don't know about it, you haven't been reading the news that much. But, and the Democratic, but you're absolutely right. The Democratic Party is going to have to figure out a strategy around this. And so far, their strategy has been to hope it doesn't happen. And that's not a strategy. And how they're, and a lot is going to depend on who No Labels puts up and whether they're successful in getting in all 50 states. Although they don't really need all 50 states, they need about 7 swing states, and that's it. That's really all they need, and that's which is where the Green Party in 2000 and 2016, basically handed the election to a Republican by simply having a third-party candidate on the ballot. If the Democrats wanted to be really nefarious, what they should be doing is supporting a libertarian candidate the way that the Republicans have historically supported the Green Party. Because, a Libertarian Party candidate would pull votes away from whoever the Republican nominee is. But the Democrats don't play those dirty games, sadly. Matt, thanks for the call. Rob in Waconia, Minnesota. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, and thanks for everything that you do. And especially thank you for trying to set that person earlier straight about the differences between Joe Biden and Manchin.
Yeah.
I was wondering, did you catch Rachel Maddow's segment on Project 2025 from the Heritage Foundation last night?
I've read about it, and I was just talking about it earlier this hour. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that. It's a chilling segment about
they're trying to turn America into a strongman dictatorship. Basically, let's make America like Russia, and let's make whoever the Republican president is as like Putin.
Right. Or one of the other strong men around the world.
Yeah, or
Erdogan.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you caught that, and keep up the good work.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Rob. Good to hear from you. Michael in New York City. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Okay. So, Tom, just a few things. Earlier, there was a caller I had heard. It was a very touching story about how he received loan forgiveness after paying up to 25 years or after 25 years.
Yeah, Biden just did this for about 800,000 Americans. It's getting no publicity. But I talked about it on the program yesterday, actually.
Okay, cool. So I just want your advice. I'm not eligible for the 25-year period, but I'm going to write my congressman and just make a few suggestions. I'm actually 3 suggestions, which may even be options, for Congress to either reduce the interest, which is now 7%, or to have a moratorium on the interest to at least let the people pay the principal. Maybe they could do a moratorium for 2 or 3 years or whatever, or to make eligible a write-off on the interest, because right now, Tom, I think it caps at $75,000 if you're single, whereas you can write off interest on your loan. Now, I'm in 6 figures, so I'm not eligible to write off any of the interest.
Right.
So what do you think about those 3?
Those are good. I think probably the most important thing that could be done about student loan debt that might even get some Republican support, although, God only knows, would be to reverse the Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005. Up until 2005, if you wanted to declare bankruptcy to get out from under your student loans, you could do it. And I'm guessing that there's probably several 100,000, maybe several million Americans who, given an opportunity to declare bankruptcy to purge themselves of their student loans, would do so in a heartbeat. But in 2005, Republicans pushed this legislation through with the Bush administration, and there were some Democrats who defended it. Debbie Stabenow came on this program and defended this, saying, well, student loan borrowers, young people, they have to learn responsibility too. We shouldn't give them the bankruptcy out. And I really went after her on that, and she hasn't been willing to come back on my program since then. And that was in 2005 when I had that debate with her. So that, I think, would probably be the most. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't have student debt. There's no other advanced democracy in the world that has student debt as a problem, as a societal problem. Occasionally you get people who, went to a fancy college and they have some debt. But basically every other nation in the world, from Canada to Europe to Central America, Costa Rica, you can go all the way to MD or PhD for free in Costa Rica, for example. I mean, countries take care of their people. At the very least, we need to reverse the 2005 bankruptcy law. And that would be the thing that I would be, if I was looking for a pressure point that has a real possibility of passing Congress, that would be it. Does that help?
Okay, Tom. Yep, and no.
All right. Good luck,
It helps
Michael.
a lot, Tom. Thanks a lot.
Spread the word.
Okay.
It's 44 minutes past, well, almost 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann program. Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations and the big banks who loan student loans would really rather you didn't know.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Alvin in Greeley, Colorado. Hey, Alvin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to address that Sandra caller. I think she was probably just a liberal purist that no matter what Democrats do, it's never good enough. They always blame Democrats for what, She said Biden put Thomas on the court. Well, that's the benefit of hindsight. But he was put there with bipartisan support.
That's true.
But, in
fact, I believe he got like 91 votes or something, some really high percentage.
Yeah, exactly. And then I wanted to talk about Manchin real quick. It seems like Manchin has a vendetta against Biden. If he runs as a third party, he knows he won't win, but I think his goal is to make sure Biden doesn't get reelected.
Could be. It may well be because he's a fossil fuel multi-millionaire, and Biden has not been that kind to the fossil fuel industry and speaks out against them. So yeah, I don't disagree, Alvin. And I think Joe Manchin more than anything else, though. I mean, I've met Joe Manchin. I lived in the same marina as he does. His boat in D.C. I lived there for 7 years. The guy is a preening peacock. He's, he really is, and he's all about himself, and he's in his 70s now, and he's worth tens, maybe hundreds, I don't know, of millions of dollars, and he's got the biggest boat in the marina. Or did when I lived there, I'll tell you that. And this is all about Joe Manchin's ego, and we're seeing the same thing with Kyrsten Sinema, which is why it's not surprising that these two egomaniacs or narcissists are behaving the way they are. Alvin, thank you for the call. Martin in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Martin, what's on your mind today?
Well, I heard a lot of talk about moving to blue states and everything. And as you know, I live in Georgia, which is one of these crazy states. I don't think moving to a blue state will help, because if things go south in the next couple of elections, these things will be nationwide. There'll be nowhere you can go.
Well, that is a concern. That is a very real concern.
Nobody's mentioning it. Yeah, nobody's mentioning it. And I think that's the message that needs to be gotten out, because, the only place I could go at 63 years old and being handicapped is maybe Scotland, because my mom's from there. But number one, I don't like the cold, and number two, I don't have the money to live there for a year before I could get health care.
Right.
And sooner or later, and this is the one thing that people need to realize, who's next?
Yeah.
Drug addicts, people with drug convictions or drug treatment, just anybody that they can use to beat up on. That's a minority or an easy group to pick on, right. Following Hitler to the T, as he did. And, of course, we can't even talk about that because we can't even teach in school the history of the Third Reich and the Holocaust anymore. It's fiction. It's woke and all that. We need to come up with some little one-word terms of our own, but we really need to press that issue, because I don't think all the people calling today are arguing about their little pet projects not going through, but then you lose everything and then some if it goes the wrong way, and we don't fight. The time is to fight. At 63 years old, I'm just beginning to fight.
God bless.
And I'm not going to quit. So that's the thing. I will talk to people. I'll go places. I'll give rides, whatever I have to do.
Yeah, good on you, Martin. That is the obligation of all of us. This is the tag you're at moment. Our democracy, more than I think any time in our history outside of possibly 1861, is hanging by a thread right now. And thank you, Martin, and good on you. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Back in 60 seconds. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls here. Mark in South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? About 3 weeks ago, when Congressman Polkan was on, I was able to ask a question about the Democrats delaying their convention to the last week of September since there's not going to be debates, and then go for it from there. And because the national networks are going to cover whoever Republican candidate is, and I'm pretty sure it may not be Trump, but there's going to be no debates, and Biden won't have a platform to lay out, won't have an agenda to lay out his platform that he worked over 4 years. This way he would, if he has a late convention, he would have an election bump, and then the last 5 weeks he could barnstorm and go over all of his accomplishments.
That's clearly their plan,
campaign.
Isn't it?
Right.
I mean, that's the point you're making, Mark?
I want the Democrats to do that. So, yeah, the Republicans are not going to have a debate.
Oh, I see.
And they say, well, let's stick it to them. Let's wait to have our convention to the end of September.
Right.
And we'll go in with
So when is the Democrat? Forgive me for not knowing these things. I probably should. But when is the Democratic convention?
I haven't heard the date yet, but I think it's in Chicago, right?
I don't know.
Does that sound right?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
But they could wait to the end of September, and you would still have time for the candidates to be on the absentee ballots to get, and all that.
The only problem with that is that means right up until the end of September, you've got, the fringe candidates on the Democratic side out bashing Biden.
Yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to play up, and even
it probably won't get that much publicity. I don't think the press is taking any of these people seriously.
But even Manchin and Sinema and their thing, I think that's good for mostly 5 or 4%. Yeah. And I think Biden's still going to have a general population turnout of 52 to 55%.
Yeah, I sure hope so.
I really do.
My sense of it is that between just the general insanity of the GOP, their support of fascism, and this whole abortion issue, that this election is going to be a blowout. But I thought that in 2016. I'm not counting on anything. I'm going to work my butt off to make sure that we don't lose our democracy. Mark, thank you for the call. Roberta in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Hey, Roberta, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, and I love your show.
Thank you.
As a woman, I'm a woman of color, but I've talked and I've watched shows, and they ask women what they think, these mega women, what they think of Trump when he says these derogatory things about women. And they get their responses are like, well, he's just a guy, that's bar talk. I don't understand these women.
I wonder if some of them are essentially, at least psychologically anyway, maybe emotionally, kind of the equivalent of the abused spouse who stays with her partner?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've even tried to talk to some, and they become very angry. And I'll just say, I'm just trying to understand what it is. I don't understand it. It's amazing how they just write it off as, oh, he's just a guy. All men are like that. I'm serious. And I'm like, I don't understand that.
I think his naked racism, essentially, his bigotry, is the thing that binds most of these white women and men to him. I really think that probably 70% of Trump's serious followers are following him because of bigotry, pure and simple. And the remaining 30% just, have drank the Kool-Aid, or they're into QAnon or whatever, and they just think, that he's saving the country from the evil international Jews or something. But I really think that it comes down to racism. And that's why they would get angry when you as a black woman would ask them that question, because they're not going to say that to you.
Right.
So, because
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. He has given license to bigots to be bigots. It's one of the real tragedies of his presidency. Roberta, thank you for the call. Maria in Westchester, New York. Hey, Maria, what's on your mind today? Maria, you are on the air. No,
Hello?
Maria. Maria?
I'm here.
Hey, okay. So what's up?
Is this Tom?
It is. You are on the air. You need to turn your TV off. What's up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Okay, Maria, I'm going to put you on hold, and I'll come back to you in a little bit. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Great show.
Thank you.
I wanted to let us all know that right now Biden has an enemy or a villain to run against, and the villain is going after red states more than blue states. And our country can't afford the onslaught of casualties that we're incurring. We need to coalesce against the biggest villain of our time, and that is catastrophic climate.
Yeah, this was the point that I made last Friday when I wrote an op-ed, I think it was Friday, about this.
What I think my point is, I loved that. That was a perfect op-ed. But what are we doing? Well, let me remind everybody what happened after 9/11. We got the daily barrage of color-coded terrorism threat levels on TV, and it was crazy.
Yeah, be afraid, be very afraid. That was the message of the Bush administration.
But now, can I just say this? We have reason to be afraid.
Yeah.
Okay, we have forest fires. We have floods. We have droughts and hurricanes and tornadoes. And we are pouring money into red states as well as blue. We have catastrophic weather. And we need to get on the air and go to war against this condition. And we need to make sure that the press is aware of it. And we need to color code it from green to maroon at worst. And every single state needs to highlight their own state and how they're able to get it from maroon down to green and what they're doing, and make sure that they all enter that contest, if you will, because Americans love games, don't they? Yeah. We need to have a goal for every state to see how they can reduce, because the federal government, is feeding these states what they need. We're declaring disasters everywhere, mostly in blue and red states.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, Lori. That's absolutely brilliant. And you're absolutely right. The Biden administration should come up with a color-coded climate change alert system, danger of climate change damage or something like that, and do it nationally. And every state should be doing it. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. That's a brilliant idea. Lori, thank you so much for the call. We'll be back. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online, and a lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent.
It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America by de Tocqueville.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Mary Grant, the Public Water for All Director at Food and Water Watch, the website foodandwaterwatch.org. Food and Water is the Twitter handle, or Mary Grant _water. Mary, welcome to the program. In this moment when we're learning that large swaths of the American public water supplies are contaminated with these cancer-causing forever chemicals and things like this, I understand that the Republicans are planning a 64% cut in programs for clean water. What the heck is going on here? I'm not hearing
timing on their part to propose massive cuts to our safe water and clean water programs. They just released a proposed budget or a spending bill for water, for the clean water and drinking water state revolving fund programs. These are the main source of federal funding for safe water and wastewater systems, and it's at the lowest levels ever proposed in the history of these programs. This is unprecedented and reckless.
Why would Republicans want to cut back on clean water? I mean, they drink water too. Is it just that the polluting companies are spiffing them? Is this just more political bribery, or is there some weird ideology here, or do they somehow think that maybe it's like the magical thinking around COVID, like, yeah, we're all immune, it doesn't matter what's in our water? What's going on?
They're saying it's in the name of cost cutting. It's just about austerity, reducing the size of government. Historically, these programs have had broad bipartisan support. Every community across the country really needs safe water, like you said, and these programs have been used by communities across the country, big and small. They're wildly successful, and everyone says that they work well. We need to fix some things around how we can get money to disadvantaged communities, but they're very successful and have historically, traditionally enjoyed bipartisan support. So it was very upsetting to see such a massive cut proposed this year, just in the name of like political showmanship, mostly, I think, to propose this massive cut. We're going to streamline government, but cutting the basic programs that make our government function is really alarming to see happen, particularly after decades of bipartisan support.
Yeah, I totally get it. Republicans control the House of Representatives right now. Is there a chance that this cut, this massive budget cut to clean water programs nationwide, that they are proposing, they can hold the line on, or is this just, like you said, performance art, and they'll change their tune or back down or whatever when push comes to shove?
Well, this is proposed in the House. After the House marks it up, it'll need to go to negotiations with the Senate. So we are hoping that it's dead on arrival in the Senate. So we're calling on senators to reject this out of hand, to not cut these essential water programs. But, this is setting a tune for the future Congresses. What happens if the Senate changes over during the next election? Like, this is very alarming to keep in mind about how we need to protect our essential water and sewer programs and to hold the line so that they're not cut back. It's very alarming to see this happen. I mean, these are programs that were created under the Reagan administration. So for decades now, they've enjoyed bipartisan support. And so now it's just in the name of this like really far right, like austerity that we're seeing them being proposed for massive cuts.
So probably the force behind this are the right-wing billionaires who don't want their taxes to go up to pay for the commons. I'm just guessing, but so Mary, let's we're talking with Mary Grant, the Public Water for All Director of foodandwaterwatch.org. Let's drill down a little deeper into this, no pun intended. What specifically do these programs do that the Republicans want to cut?
Sure. So this is the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Program and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Program. These are the main sources of federal funding for building drinking water systems, updating treatment plants, removing PFAS from our drinking water, and updating our wastewater systems, stopping sewage overflows. These are the programs that keep your drinking water safe, that help clean up your waterways. So we're not seeing rivers on fire because of all the pollution from wastewater systems. These are essential programs that it's the main source of federal funding for water and wastewater programs across the country. These are allocated to the states. The states have a project priority list. They give projects based on need to communities to help make those updates that keep our drinking water safe and keep our waterways clean.
Wow. Wow. And if these funds are cut, does it, I mean, are we, for example, any town USA, so your average city or community, will there be immediate deleterious effects, or does this, hurt more like long-range planning kind of things, or building new water treatment systems, or specifically what kind of impact would this kind of a cut have on the average person in America?
So we're going to see two main impacts. For communities that have resources to make improvements on their own, it's going to lead to rate increases on households. This is at a time when the price of all the essentials is going up. Families are already seeing higher and higher rates for food and everything and rent. So this is going to add more pressure onto households when their household water and sewer bills go up to make these necessary improvements. Then on the other hand, there's communities that just simply cannot afford to make these improvements. This is going to leave those communities with toxic water. You're talking about cities like Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi, that had decades of federal and state disinvestment because the states weren't allocating the funding to these communities. That created a crisis because without that support, many communities across the country, disproportionately low-income communities, communities of color, disadvantaged communities, they can't make the projects on their own without this support. So that's going to leave toxic water. This is going to lead polluted waterways, sewage spills, sewage backing up into homes. This has the potential to create a crisis if we do not invest in our water systems.
I think you just identified why these Republicans want to cut these funds, because the wealthy communities will be just fine. Their water bill may go up a little bit, but they can afford it. Poor communities are going to take the brunt of it. That in and of itself is kind of a nice summary of the post-Reagan GOP, it seems. I mean, it's just almost like cruelty for its own sake. I'm just shocked. Is there any pushback in Congress? I mean, are the Democrats standing up and making noise about this, or are you guys the lone voice in the wilderness? I mean, how is this playing out politically in D.C.?
Yeah, so it is under attack in Congress. There are advocates in Congress right now who oppose these cuts. We work closely with Representative Bonnie Watsman-Coleman from New Jersey. She's the lead sponsor on a really great piece of legislation called the Water Act, the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act. It would fully fund our water systems at the level that EPA says is necessary to comply with federal laws. It would create a trust fund to remove our water system funding from these annual appropriations battles. So it's not a bargaining chip for political bargaining chip in Congress anymore. So this is the vision that we want to see, is to remove it from these annual appropriations battle, to create this trust fund, a dedicated source of federal funding for our water and sewer system, so we don't have to worry about the safety of our water anymore.
What does any of this have to do with, and I get it, the answer may be nothing, but to do with the issue around, about half of our public utilities, and I don't know what it is with water, I know with electricity it's around half, being privately owned and run on a for-profit basis, and very often being run very poorly on a for-profit basis, compared to municipally owned or county-owned water systems that are run not for profit, but rather run for the benefit of their customers.
Yeah, so in the United States, about 90% of people who are on a community water system, so if you get piped water service, you're going to get it from your local government or another government entity. But private systems serve about 10% of people, and absolutely right, they charge significantly higher rates. We worked on a study with researchers from Cornell University, and we found that private ownership is associated with a 59% higher household water bill. And it is the single biggest factor leading to higher water bills, even more than aging infrastructure, more than drought, which was very surprising to us. So we're also seeing across the country aggressive efforts by these large water companies to take control of our essential water and sewer systems. We're seeing a lot of privatization activity in states like Pennsylvania right now, where they've passed state laws that grease the wheels on privatization by making it more profitable for them to do business. And it's actually really interesting. Right now in Congress, we're also seeing legislation to open up that main source of federal funding for wastewater systems to these large investor-owned utilities. There's a bill out there called the Clean Water SRF Parity Act. They call it a parity act. They have really good names of the private water industry, but it's legislation of the private water industry to open up that main source of federal funding, the Clean Water SRF, to these large investor-owned utilities. So at the same time we're seeing these large cuts in funding, we're also seeing more players want to take that limited, available pie away, which would necessarily take money away from local governments. Every dollar a large investor-owned utility gets is a dollar that would not be going to a local government. So yeah, this is what the companies are doing right now. They're trying to take that, get access to that funding, take it away from local governments. At the same time, the available funding is falling.
Amazing. You can read all about it over at foodandwaterwatch.org. Mary Grant, the Public Water for All Director, Food and Water on Twitter. Mary, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, great talking with you. That was very informative. Thank you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day in just a moment. Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The White House is thanking Marjorie Taylor Greene. Seriously. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. And welcome back. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, Tom. Good show.
Thank you.
By the way, to address what your last guest was speaking of, we keep a good filter on our tap water. I never drink tap water.
Yeah.
I just don't trust it.
Probably a good idea.
But that's pure is a good one, P-U-R. But that's not why I called. First, I want to say I was very offended by Trump's remarks last night. I'm a Democrat and a devout convert to Catholicism since 1983. And I don't believe abortion is right, but what I do with my body is not what I expect other people to do. It's none of my business what they do. So I just wanted to say that up front. But I have never voted Republican in my entire life, and I never will. But I do believe that if I don't understand, first of all, why John Huntsman would align himself with someone like Joe Manchin. I mean, Joe Manchin is not a good person, and I have always had respect for John Huntsman. I've always thought he was a good, smart, decent man. In fact, he even speaks Chinese, I believe.
He does, yeah.
So, I believe that he is the one person who could actually beat Donald Trump if he ran as a Republican and forgot this idea, which is crazy, to ally himself with someone like Joe Manchin.
Yeah.
I mean, John Huntsman is not a bad man at all. He's good.
Well, as far as we know, I mean, if he decides that he's going to run for president with Joe Manchin, I think we have to recalibrate our thinking about John Huntsman.
Well, they believe that that's going to stop Trump, but I think the best way for him to stop Trump is for John Huntsman to run in the Republican Party against him, because he would make some very good points, I think. Not that I would vote for him. I mean, I've always voted for Democrats and always will.
Right.
But I do like John Huntsman.
But the problem he would have if he ran in the Republican primary right now is that he has no constituency any longer, other than maybe Mormons. You know, he's aggressively Mormon, and but I can't imagine him having the kind of base. You know, this is kind of the twilight of his life. I mean, my sense of it is if it's true what the news reports say, that it would be a Manchin-Huntsman ticket with a Democrat at the top, because they're trying to pull away votes from Biden, not so much from Trump. And then Huntsman is
Trump.
Yeah, I know, but that's not the truth. What they're trying to do is pull votes away from Biden. And that's why major Republican billionaire donors are donating to No Labels. And
yes, I heard they got $70 million.
Right. So what Huntsman does is he provides them with cover. He allows them to say, see, we're not just, you know, we're not just trying to put up a Democrat to hurt Biden. We're doing both, and Huntsman will pull from Trump. Huntsman isn't going to pull from Trump because a Democrat is at the top of the ticket, Joe Manchin. So, you know, this is pure and simple an attempt to just screw with the election of 2024 and hand it to Donald Trump.
Well, I wanted your opinion on that, you know?
Yeah, I think that maybe Huntsman has a bigger ego than we thought. I mean, that's not unusual with politicians.
Yeah,
I guess we'll find out, Carol. You know, my sense of him was always similar to yours, that he was part of the kind of Mitt Romney, Don McCain Republican crowd, the more reasonable Republicans, and I put that in scare quotes, but you know what I mean. Carol, thanks for the call. I got to run. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And you know, climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. Oh my, welcome back. This is the funniest story. Marjorie Taylor Greene apparently just kind of went to Wikipedia or something. I don't know. It's very strange, but she just discovered that Lyndon Johnson brought us Medicare and Medicaid, and you know, the Great Society programs, housing programs, food stamps, the WIC program, women and infants and children, you know, these kind of things. And she's somehow very upset about it. This is totally bizarre. Check this out.
Lyndon B. Johnson is very similar to Joe Biden. How are they the same? They're both Democrat socialists. Lyndon B. Johnson was the majority leader in the Senate. Does that sound familiar? He was vice president to Kennedy. Joe was vice president to Obama. He was appointed as the president after JFK was assassinated, then he was elected. His big socialist programs were the Great Society. The Great Society were big government programs to address education,
Oh, my God.
Medical care, urban problems, rural poverty, transportation, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and welfare, the Office of Economic Opportunity, and big labor and labor unions.
How dare him?
LBJ had the Great Society, but Joe Biden had Build Back Better, and he still is working on it. The largest public investment in social infrastructure and environmental programs that is actually finishing what FDR started, that LBJ expanded on, and Joe Biden is attempting to complete. Wow. Socialism.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we are now $32 trillion in debt.
Yeah, well, we can end Marjorie at that point. I mean, yeah, $32 trillion in debt because of the Reagan tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, the Bush 2 illegal wars, and the Trump tax cuts. If you take out those 3 sets of tax cuts and those 2 wars, America has no debt at all. So, but anyhow, Marjorie Taylor Greene going off on how, Joe Biden is trying to finish the job that Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt started. The White House took that clip that you just saw and retweeted it with a, "You caught us." I love it. I absolutely love it. So they're thanking them. They're absolutely thanking them. All right, next story. Is Greg Abbott actually the dumbest politician in America? Christopher Blair, who lives in Maine, runs a satirical website called the Dunning-Kruger Times. Dunning-Kruger is a psychological illness where people think that they're experts in things that they're not experts at. And they shared he wrote a spoof, a kind of Annie Borowitz kind of piece about Garth Brooks being booed off the stage over supporting Bud Light, which didn't happen. And Greg Abbott retweeted it or something, and so the author here, he says Christopher Blair, he says, "When I saw that, I was beside myself with joy. Greg Abbott is one of the dumbest people in the country." Abbott on 25th of June, he responded to this story about Brooks being jeered by, quote, patriots over his call for tolerance at the annual Texas County Jamboree in the city of Hambreston. Well, there is no Texas County Jamboree or Country Jamboree, and there is no city of Hambreston, Texas. But Greg Abbott, he tweeted out, "Go woke, go broke," on this false story. Yeah, dumbest politician in America. Well, he's also one of the most dangerous, right? Greg Abbott brought us $10,000 bounties on the heads of women who get abortions from Texas. Not good. Not a good man. Incredible stuff. Famine is coming to Africa. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break. Stay with us, and then I'll pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with you. Markoff with a foreword by Richard Clark. This is from the foreword. For some Americans, George W. Bush looks good by comparison to the incumbent, Donald Trump. In his post-presidency, Bush has devoted himself to worthy causes and acted in a bipartisan manner. The 43rd president should, however, be judged not by comparison to America's worst president, nor by what Bush may have done after leaving office. He should be evaluated for his actions in office, his nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. This volume from Stephen Markoff provides the evidence for such an evaluation. You can judge for yourself. For me, there is little doubt. I, unfortunately, witnessed Bush and his administration make many of their most cataclysmic decisions. I was in the room when some of them occurred. When in December 2000, the Supreme Court of the United States decided on a 5-4 vote that George W. Bush would become the 43rd president, I was the special assistant to the president for national security and national coordinator for security and counterterrorism for President William J. Clinton. I anticipated leaving the White House on January 20th, 2001, when the Clinton presidency ended. However, I was asked by the incoming administration to stay on for an unspecified period because, as it was explained to me, there was no one on Bush's incoming team who knew much about terrorism or who wanted my job. Departing Clinton administration officials stressed to the newly arriving Bush team and to Bush himself the importance and urgency of dealing with the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. Indeed, the Clinton administration had developed an extensive series of further steps to combat al-Qaeda that it would have taken had it continued in office, or indeed had Vice President Al Gore assumed office in 2001. Within days of Bush's inauguration, I asked for an urgent meeting at the cabinet level to review both the threat and the plan to ratchet up the measures against al-Qaeda. No such meeting occurred until a week before 9/11, and that meeting was inconclusive. From January 2001 through the second week in September, Bush personally received frequent intelligence warnings that al-Qaeda posed an imminent threat. He convened no meetings to address the issue. His inner circle of national security advisors did nothing, despite frequent urgings by the CIA director and the national coordinator, including such vivid imagery as our asking in writing that they consider a near future in which there would be hundreds of dead bodies in the streets of America. Instead, they focused on Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Bush's nonfeasance cost American lives. Following the deaths of over 3,000 innocent civilians on 9/11, the Bush administration attempted to tie the al-Qaeda attack to Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Despite CIA and FBI analyses that reiterated Iraq's non-involvement, the Bush administration almost immediately followed the 9/11 attack by beginning to make plans to invade Iraq. Senior Bush officials spoke privately of the need to demonstrate our strength in the wake of the 9/11 attack, show our might by destroying the largest army in the Middle East, and thereby also prove our willingness to take U.S. military casualties to achieve our ends. Prior to 9/11, foreign terrorists who had attacked Americans had been successfully sought out throughout the world and arrested by U.S. law enforcement authorities assisted by the intelligence community. Many terrorists had been returned to U.S. territory, given their Miranda rights, provided with counsel, tried in our civilian criminal courts, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in maximum security prison cells. One, tried by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was executed. Despite this record, the Bush administration abandoned criminal process and established its own extrajudicial system for dealing with terrorists post 9/11. That new system used techniques that any objective observer would judge were torture. Perhaps the most well-known torture technique was the procedure known as waterboarding. The United States government had tried World War II Japanese military personnel for using the exact same technique. They were found guilty, and some were executed by hanging. The United States Senate's Committee on Intelligence conducted the most extensive oversight and investigation and examination in its history on the issue of torture during the Bush administration. That voluminous study concluded that torture was employed and that it had not, despite administration claims to the contrary, uniquely revealed information that had prevented terrorist attacks. To the contrary, it showed that tortured prisoners, unable to satisfy their interrogators with information that the terrorists did not know, instead guessed at what kind of story would stop the torture and then fabricated information of the kind they thought their prosecutors wanted to hear. Bush was not only aware of the torture, he approved it. His role in giving authorization for such acts can rightly be considered criminal malfeasance, as should his orders to invade Iraq. Among the many justifications the Bush administration considered for their invasion and occupation of Iraq, they chose finally to make the alleged weapons of mass destruction resistance their chief complaint. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics the wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a three-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. You know, he came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the three steps. Number one, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them, along with massive gerrymandering. Number two, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities, while merging with one of the large factions of a church. And the billionaires in the country. And number three, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' Three-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. And welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Just a quick story here. On Monday, this grain deal, you know, Russia and Ukraine are at war, or at least Russia is at war against Ukraine. The minute Russia stops bombing Ukraine, the war will probably be over. But Russia Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of wheat in the world and the single largest exporter of wheat to Africa. Keep in mind, Ukraine is a country, it is physically the largest country in Europe. It is the size of Texas. It's huge. And virtually all of the country is very fertile farmland. So imagine Texas having the soil and the climate of Indiana. I mean, that's what it's like, right? That's Ukraine. And they produce mind-boggling amounts of wheat. Just in the last year, they've exported 32.8 million tons of grain and other agricultural products under this deal that had been originally negotiated by the United Nations and President Erdogan of Turkey between Russia and Ukraine to allow Ukrainian grain shipments to leave their southern ports like Odessa without interference. Odessa was attacked this morning, by the way, by Russia. So Russia on Monday said, okay, we're canceling the deal, or we're not going to renew the deal. Actually, it expired on Monday. And they said, we're not going to renew the deal until basically Ukraine stops fighting back. Peskov, their spokesman, Putin's spokesman, says provocations and attacks against Russian civilian and military facilities, end quote, must end. He said, only upon receipt of concrete results and not promises and assurances will Russia be ready to consider restoring the deal. This is known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So without these exports of Ukrainian grain, we're going to start seeing famine in Africa. I mean, there's already a major crisis in North Africa. It's the reason why you have so many Libyan and Tunisian refugees fleeing right now. I mean, Syrian refugees are still trying to flee too, fleeing across the Mediterranean up, you know, to Italy and Greece and whatnot, and trying to get into Europe. And now this is just going to compound that problem. It's going to make it much, much, much worse. So anyhow, picking up your phone calls here, Sharon in Laguna, New Mexico. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I'm going to take you off the subject a little bit and look at a near future, something I see coming. I'm a social science fiction writer. Mm-hmm. And what I see coming is beginning right now with the terrible heat and farmers insurance coming out of another state and all our floods. I see climate migration refugees beginning with your more upper middle income moving out of the heat and the flood zones and the wildfire zones.
Right.
And what I see coming is the establishment of enclaves, political enclaves. I don't want to buy in a neighborhood that has a whole bunch of their flags out on, and their signs out for elections that are against mine.
Right.
I want to go with my people. And I see enclaves forming.
So
these people
what does an enclave look like? What are you talking? I mean, I realize that there's Republicans who are literally moving to Idaho. Not just Republicans. I mean, these hardcore right-winger anarchists moving to Idaho.
Yep, right into the cities, to suburbs in the cities and various places. Especially the conservatives. The conservatives will pull together, whereas the liberals will move apart. And where the liberals are going to go, and this is what I see coming, is they're going to go repurpose gentrification with self-sufficient, on-site wastewater treatment, on-site power generation, lots of greenhouses.
Yeah.
And these various things like this that are coming in the next 18 years. I see this happening by about 2040, but it is beginning now. One of the first things that people ask real estate agents is about the politics of the area they're going to. And that begins with your schools.
Yeah.
And this is happening right now.
I know. And and it's going to get worse as climate change gets worse. You're going to see more people fleeing coastal areas. You're going to see more people fleeing areas with wildfires, drought, flooding. I mean, Phoenix has been over 110 every day for 20 days now, something like that, 18 days.
Yes, I live in New Mexico. I'm very aware of what's going on over there.
Yeah. So and Las Vegas. I mean, you had people on a Delta Airlines flight yesterday that got delayed by 4 hours. I'm assuming it was weather in Atlanta, but it had to sit on the tarmac in Las Vegas in 110-degree weather, and 5 people were carried off the plane on stretchers, including a flight attendant. People were freaking out. They were soiling themselves on the flight and passing out. So, yeah, I think it's entirely possible, Sharon. I really do. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us. CJ in Jamestown, New York. Hey, CJ, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, great show. I'm a bipolar American and cancer survivor, and I'm trying to think outside the box when it comes to the climate. It should be at the top of everybody's priority list as opposed to geopolitical constipation that's going on in the world today. And my thoughts are to use the United Nations and set up a treasurer, and they could set up a fund, and it would be a global tax relative to your income for every person on this planet, where that money can go to climate catastrophes as well as renewable sources of energy as opposed to using fossil fuels.
Why not make it a carbon tax so that the people and the countries that are most contributing to the problem are also most paying to solve it?
Yeah, I think the United Nations should step up and be part of the governmental society and be able to control where that money goes when it comes to catastrophes, just like FEMA.
Right. The problem is the UN has no taxing authority. I mean, they can require membership dues from member nations, and they do, and that's sort of arguably a tax. But at the individual level, the community level, or even the country level, beyond just the normal membership dues, they have no mechanism to do that. But I like the idea, CJ. I think it's...
Yeah, it's not necessarily a new world order, but it's just a step to bring the world closer together when it comes to the climate.
No, I get it. But the new world order would be exactly how the Republicans would freak out about it. But I get it. Thank you, CJ. Maria in Westchester, New York. Hey, Maria, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. 2 things. First of all, thank you so much for picking up my call. It's great to be on it, and I love your show.
Thank you.
I just wanted to respond briefly to the woman that called earlier, Sandra, who was comparing Joe Manchin to President Biden. And it made me think of this book I just picked up. It's called Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean, MacLean. And in it, she highlights, as far as I've read, how the Republicans or the far right have been working to basically undermine, every right that we have fought and struggled for to achieve.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I have friends who say, they're all the same. You can't have a discussion. It's always, they're both the same. All politicians are bad. And in fact, that's not true, because if you took the time to educate yourself a little bit and to understand, and I think, watching you and listening to you speak, is one of the best ways. I love your show for that, and I love when you talk about, you have your book club. So that's one thing, and I think if Sandra understood, what they've been doing for the past, I'd say 50, 60 years, according to Nancy McLean, she'd understand how different the politicians are, and what's been happening. That, Roe v. Wade just didn't happen overnight.
No.
They chipped away at it.
Yeah, and Nancy McLean was, she's been a guest on this program several times. Her book, Democracy in Chains, is must-reading. It basically exposes the Koch network and these right-wing billionaires. And it's compelling stuff. And the one thing I would say about that, the earlier caller, that I probably should have said to her, is if you go back and read the Mueller report, it says that the principal target of the Internet Research Agency, which was being fed inside campaign information by Paul Manafort. He was giving them secret polling where they knew exactly which states and which voters in which states needed to be targeted to try to either inflate the Trump vote or suppress the Clinton vote. And the choice they made was to suppress the Clinton vote. And the way they did this is they principally targeted black people. And the principal message was there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. And that had a huge impact, actually. A large number of, in those 5 states that the Internet Research Group targeted, later the New York Times and others went back later and just did, surveys of public opinion among the black community and found that this idea that there is no difference between the two parties was measurably higher in those states. And those are the states where a lot of black people just didn't show up to vote because, hey, why bother? Both parties are the same. And so, when I hear anybody say that, I want to point that out, but particularly people who have been targeted, specifically targeted by the Russians with that kind of propaganda. Maria, thank you. Thanks for the call. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We're picking up your phone calls here on the Thom Hartmann program. Talk media for the sane among us. And we'll be back with more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Defending America from the right-wing billionaires' weapons of mass deception. I'll be right back with your call. And welcome back. Rick in Castro Valley, California. Hey, Rick, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you? First, I want to tell you that I donated to Free Speech TV, and I was very proud.
Good on you.
My wife's like, hey, what is this donation for Free Speech TV? I was like, Renee, I watch it every day.
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
so I got to support you guys. But thank you. And one thing that I wanted to mention, I'm an African American who came from, struggled to get through college, never had any money, very poor, got there through affirmative action, would kindly get away with that. And here it is. I am retired, 65. I have to supplement my income by working as a sub. The crazy thing is we've had so many personal challenges. I've lost my son through drug addiction and mental health issues, and leading up to that were all kinds of legal issues and hospitalizations. I am about to be hit with having to pay my student loans because I worked in the congressional office for 5 years. When you're a congressional employee, they pay. They have a part of their budget. That budget is for student loan debt.
Oh, interesting.
So I paid. Yeah, so I paid while I was the member, working on numbers staff. So here it is, 65 years old, retired, having to hustle, and fortunately my wife's younger, so she'll be able to work. And we talked about it. It's like, well, I'm going to have to start paying these student loans back because they don't want to help us. If they can give up the money for loans and PPE loans, all that stuff, and get forgiveness, but they don't want to do that, anything for the American public.
Yep. So
I'm going to have to live with this now. And the one mistake I made, back in the 2000s or late 1990s, I had a chance to, fold it into a bankruptcy declaration. But for me, I was young. I was like, no, I want to do the right thing. And now I'm paid for it.
Right. Now you can't declare bankruptcy on student loans. Which is bizarre.
That was the time I never thought, because the Bush administration implemented that rule.
Yeah.
Discharged loans.
Yep. 2005.
So, but you know,
well.
God bless everybody. We can hang in there. It's going to be okay. If we got to pay a few pennies, look, I'll never pay it all off. Yeah. Never. But
it's just insane that anybody who's 65 years old has any student. I mean, it's insane that any Americans have student debt. We know from the experience of the GI Bill back in the 1950s and 60s that every dollar that the federal government invests in giving college education to people, and it wasn't just free college. My dad and my wife's dad both got I believe it was a $100 a month stipend. And back then, $100 a month was like $1,000 a month in today's dollars, you know, and to go to college. And for every dollar that we invested, we got $7 back in additional tax revenue and economic stimulus that we wouldn't have had if those people had not been college educated. You know, education is an investment, and we should be looking at it as such rather than as an expense. But you've got a bunch of banks that make big money on this, and because the Supreme Court legalized political bribery, these banks have got a whole bunch of both Republicans and Democrats in their pocket, and that's why nobody's talking about changing that 2005 bankruptcy law, because the only group that would be hurt by changing that law would be the big banks, and it really needs to be changed. Rick, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Good on you. I'm glad you made it this far. I'm sorry to hear about your son. That's tragic. I can't imagine. But glad you made it this far, and good luck on paying off your loans. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. You know, when Volodymyr Zelensky became president of Ukraine, he was dealing with one of the more corrupt countries, a legacy of the Soviet time, with a number of very, very corrupt oligarchs who basically owned politicians. One of them, like Viktor Medvedchuk, was essentially the Rupert Murdoch of Ukraine. He owned a television network and a bunch of TV stations and was constantly pumping out right-wing poison and tearing people apart. And he owned a bunch of politicians. So, and this is the part most Americans don't know. Last June, a new law came into effect. It was passed the year before in Ukraine, that basically says to the oligarchs in Ukraine, you know, you can stay rich if you want, but you can't use your money to influence politics. No more oligarchs in politics. They called it de-oligarchization. Seriously. There's a whole piece about it over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Julie in Ithaca, New York. Hey, Julie, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello. Oh, my gosh, everything. First of all, I have to thank you like 1,000% for everything. You give the news, and you're awesome.
Well, thank you,
You saved me from Medicare Advantage, and you name it. Now, the last caller, I'm really touching base on that student loans, okay? I just wrote the White House a couple double letters and things like that. There's a lot of things people don't understand about student loan forgiveness or the issues, okay? I'm 66 and a half years old. I've been paying into student loans for 30 years.
Wow.
30. Every month. Nothing missed. And they consider me in default. No matter. Even though my credit bureau doesn't. It is a nightmare. And we need to pay, and you need to continue to talk about this issue. I'm 66 and a half years old, and I'm using my Social Security, any IRA benefits I have, pay down a really high interest rate from the government.
Right.
I want people to know that President Biden is doing the best he can Congress or Supreme Court, they are, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, Julie, here's the backstory that most people don't know, and that is that, in 1951, Russell Kirk predicted that if enough Americans joined the middle class, his argument was that, working people just don't have the sophistication or the life experience to handle the wealth associated with being in the middle class, and that if enough Americans joined the middle class, it would create social chaos. He said that in 51. Right. Most Republicans thought he was a crackpot. Then the 60s came along, and everybody said, holy cow, Russell Kirk was right. Ronald Reagan was given the job of cutting the middle class down to size, and this is one of the ways he did it. We've got $2 trillion in debt, not to mention probably another $4 or $5 trillion that's been extracted from the middle class in student costs that were actually paid off. And
1986, Reagan made such a huge change. It was not my contract. It was my contract to take a student loan and be able to take a mortgage interest or interest off. And
it used to be deductible.
Yeah, and it became undeductible.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It used to be, at the very least, you get a tax deduction for your student loan payments. Now, nothing.
And I thought that was my agreement with the government, but apparently not.
No, it's not. Julie, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and very poignant. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to bring to your attention, and that of the Thom Hartmann Nation, an exclusive article that ran yesterday in the Houston Chronicle and was updated yesterday night. Apparently, and this is hideous and heinous and inhumane, and it kind of ties in with what you were saying the other day about...
Is this about Greg Abbott saying throw the kids back in the water?
Essentially, yeah, and it kind of ties in with you citing Texas as the worst state in the union.
Yeah.
State troopers actually, in many cases, decided not to follow orders because they were told to push small children and nursing babies back into the Rio Grande. They were told not to give water to asylum seekers suffering in extreme heat. They've also been building barriers of buoys wrapped with razor wire that people are getting trapped on and drowned, including children.
I know. I've seen the stories. George, I got to run, but thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, because this is just another example of the inhumanity, the cruelty that Republicans revel in. Please double-check your voter registration. If you live in a red state, make sure that they have not yet removed you from the voting rolls. Double-check your voter registration every month if you live in a red state. And get out there and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.